The economy and health care are dominating headlines, and Bloomberg's reporters are covering those issues across the United States. We're joined now by Scott Lamon, who's covering the Fed's meeting in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and by John McCormick in Chicago, who's had a front row seat at some feisty town hall debate. Scott, let's begin with you. The annual Central Bankers Paradise at Jackson Hole, 2 years after the global financial crisis began, a year after it appeared like it might be 1929, deja vu. What's the message from Ben Bernanke and others?
Ben Bernanke gave a full-throated defense of the Fed's actions in response to the financial crisis today, Al. It was almost like the subject hanging over was whether or not he's going to get reappointed by President Obama. And obviously he didn't mention that, but he just said we did everything we could over the past year. We opened all these programs. We did these bailouts because there was no alternative. We didn't do the Lehman bailout because there was no alternative there. At the end, he closed with this line saying, I hope that a year from now we can see that we can gather here again and see that things are better. You know, left unsaid is whether he will actually be here. It seems
well, let me turn to that question in a minute, but are others out there joining him in this central banker victory dance?
There's a lot of questions about the financial crisis here. I just said, we had a session here, and there was a complete dissection of some of the causes of the crisis, the response to the crisis, what might be potential ways of preventing crises in the future, and a lot of commentary on all sides of the issue, not all positive to the Fed, but we also heard some very passionate defenses of the Fed inside that room today.
What is the chatter, Scott, about Ben Bernanke being reappointed? Most people out there think it's likely?
Most people do think it's likely. Nobody really sees, or we haven't heard anybody talk about a viable alternative that that investors would appreciate as a nomination for that slot. But in the end, of course, it is the choice of one person, that is President Obama, and he's yet to give his indication on where he's leaning.
Scott, is there a certain irony here in that Bernanke may be in good shape with the public and the Congress, but the Fed is not?
It is a dichotomy there. Bernanke he's actually formed pretty good relations with Congress. He's tried his best to make public connections, such as appearing on the 60 Minutes show, doing a town hall meeting last month. Those are things that he's tried to do. At the same time, there is some hostility toward the Fed coming from Congress. There's attempts potentially to limit the Fed's independence on monetary policy, and there's not a lot of enthusiasm for the administration's proposal that the Fed take on the role of systemic risk regulator for banks.
Scott, I know it's hardship duty with those beautiful Tetons in the background, but pursue it all this weekend, and thank you. And let me turn now from the Fed to just plain fed up, and John McCormick. John, the financial leader in Jackson Hole, the rank and file in town halls, they're not very happy, are they?
No, I was at one in downtown Little Rock this week where there was a lot of emotion. There were about 1,100 people at a midday event on Tuesday. And they had a lot of questions. Representative Snyder was holding a town hall there in downtown Little Rock. And he stood there and took questions for about 90 minutes, took 20-plus questions from people. There were cheers, there were boos. But by most standards, it was actually a fairly polite town hall. There weren't really any YouTube moments.
What was the message? What's their anger? What's their anxiety? What's their frustration?
Yeah, I mean, the people I talked to, it really seemed to be much broader than just health care. A lot of folks just seem to have very kind of anti-government feelings here. Health care, I think, is just the latest thing that's sort of made them angry or they're concerned. And so I think there's a lot kind of more sentiment here than just involving health care. I talked to one guy who's been to 3 of these town hall meetings in the past week, and he just feels very strongly about putting up a strong opposition to this issue.
John, there's been a lot written about whether these are organized sessions where people are ginned up, or whether it's just a spontaneous outpouring. From what you saw in Little Rock, and I know you reported on others, what's your sense?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think there are some national groups that are fanning the flames and are using websites. But I think at this grassroots level, there's a lot going on Twitter. There's a lot going on Facebook. In Arkansas alone, there's just dozens of Twitter and Facebook pages that are tracking this stuff and trying to kind of feed the opposition on the issue. There's also a big air war going on, of course, and that is being done by the national groups. During one newscast on Monday evening, there were 5 healthcare ads that played during a 30-minute newscast. I mean, it felt kind of like a week before a general election in terms of the level of advertising that's going on.
John, could you discern what effect, if any, it's having on Congressman Snyder, a blue dog Democrat?
Yeah, I mean, they're paying very careful attention to the sentiment. Snyder's trying to talk to people one-on-one as much as possible. I mean, they know that these town halls are potentially, can be real dramatic and can land them on cable TV or YouTube real quickly. I think they're trying to answer questions. I think they're trying to, get a little bit more aggressive on the issue and push back and try to make a stronger case for why health care reform is important for people who already have health insurance. That's one thing that Snyder was pushing real hard. He kind of criticized the White House for not doing a better job of preparing the public for why this debate is important.
Well, let me ask you quickly. You covered the Obama campaign. We had all this talk about this extraordinary grassroots effort out there around the country. Where have they been?
Yeah, they've been a no-show so far. I mean, the White House, again, is trying to rally them this week, and, the president had, an online meeting with his grassroots supporters, but they've been kind of late to the game here. And the people who are opposed to health care were taking real pride in the fact that they were using community organizing techniques. I talked to one woman who just was loving that they were able to kind of use techniques that Obama's campaign used during the campaign so successfully and turn that on the White House and turn that on Democrats. Okay. And so it's there's a lot more to go with this fight, obviously.
Hey, John, thanks.